Welcome to the latest episode of the Car and Bike podcast. I'm here again with Girish. It's a lovely afternoon. Today we are here to talk about a brand that has been in the shadows a little bit, but has been incredibly strong yet silent at the same time. This year has been a record year for most car makers in the country. Everybody is looking at best ever figures, and this brand is among them. It is Toyota. So, Girish, you were there at the Toyota plant recently. I'm sure you went through a pretty detailed presentation. They had a lot to show you. So, what did you glean from that experience?
We've known Toyota for a long time. Like in India, they've been really strong right from the beginning that they arrived. I've been to their plant before. I've been to their plant just very recently as well. And one of the things that really strikes you is the consistency, the kind of ambience that they have there, the kind of character that each and every employee sort of displays. There's a whole lot of consistency. It's like going back in time. Of course, the factory has become very modern, but you still sense that how everything is ingrained, everything is planned. I think it is that discipline that has really helped them stay so strong and diligent towards their goals. They have seen their ups and downs, but more or less they are in good position right now.
And the occasion that you were there for this time was the big announcement that they're coming up with their third plant, which will boost their manufacturing capacity. So that has been a big talking point in recent times. Long waiting periods,
Yes.
extending to a year, in 2 years in some cases. So what did they have to share on that? How much of a difference does it make, and what does it mean in the overall scheme of things?
Right. So, yes, the third plant is a big deal, not just for Toyota customers, but even for Toyota itself. If you recall, very recently they had started the third shift in their factory, and it was for the first time ever in the last 20 odd years that they've been here that they had to start that because of the demand that they've gone through. And considering they're not operating in a very affordable range of cars, their cars generally average price is 15 lakh plus. So it is a big deal for them. And the third plant is obviously to get volumes up. They are expecting to reduce wait times a lot for their customers. Also bringing in a lot new models than what they have already. So usually when we think of Toyota, we think of only two models, maybe Fortuner, Innova, but they have a range of models there, thanks partly to the help from Maruti Suzuki. More importantly, this plant will be operational only after 2 years. So it's not going to have an immediate effect on customer waiting periods, which we understand is on a reducing path. See, it's not easy for them as well.
It's such a testament, though, to the ability of the two cars, the Innova and the Fortuner, because it's those two models which have practically carried them for so many years.
Right.
Of course, they had the Etios range as well, which we know did not do exceedingly well. But it was those two models that carried them through these times to now, to today, to a point where they have other models that are seeing such high demand, such strong demand. I think those two cars have just been phenomenal in keeping Toyota going, even through the years when the going was probably not as easy.
Right. I think with the Etios and Etios Liva, it was probably not a benchmark Toyota that we talk about. It was made for a purpose and an audience that was not maybe traditionally Toyota, which as a volume player, it may have given them some numbers, but as a brand, it may not have really helped them, like a Innova does or a Fortuner does. But having said that, I think it's phenomenal, and probably all due credit to a company like theirs that they did not let it affect it in the long run. Normally with so much investment going on after a brand, it's very difficult to come out of it if it doesn't do well. But they carried on gamely, and while we see these cars around, people still remember or recall a Toyota. They think about a Fortuner or an Innova, and maybe not an Etios or an Etios Liva or a Corolla or a Camry. All the historic, sort of famous models that they have, they are the ones that come to mind first.
But how have they managed to replicate the same sort of demand and the same sort of pull with something like an Innova Hycross? Because let's face it, the Hycross, aside from the prefix and the fact that it's an MPV and has 3 rows of seating, it's so far removed from the Innova, and yet it's seeing this kind of demand. where Toyota puts in a third shift and they're still not able to clear the waiting period by a great deal.
I think there is a lot of aspiration that Indian customers see with the Toyota brand. Maybe it would have been a different story. I think we've touched upon this topic in our last podcast also. How people not only invest in just the brand, but as in not just the model, but also the brand. It plays a very important role. And somehow Toyota has that kind of impact on the customers or Indians generally, which is why they are interested in models that are coming out with the Toyota badge, irrespective of whatever it would be. The Hycross per se, I think, is pretty close to the Innova Crysta. Maybe not mechanically or hard in terms of hardware, but in terms of positioning, it's pretty close. And I think that is something that a lot of Indian customers like, and they want and they aspire to have a car like an Innova or a Hycross now. I think it's very relevant, and that kind of keeps it in the hunt.
And if you think about it, while the Innova is still there, the traditional Innova Crysta is still there. Even if you were to imagine a future with no Innova Crysta, the Innova Hycross could actually keep things going like nothing's ever changed, which is shocking if you think about it. Usually, manufacturers never replace a model that has been doing extremely well for years and years. You will get a generational change, but it'll be more evolution than revolution. We've seen it with the Swift. And Maruti has never really changed the basic template of it. Here, Toyota's made such a big switch over with the Hycross. The Hycross doesn't have a diesel, which was the hallmark for Innova owners for years and years.
And going to monocoque.
And a monocoque construction. But if you think about it, if you take out the Crysta today, I don't think it affects Toyota at all. They can just keep on going with the Hycross. And that's, if someone would have said this 2 years ago, I think we would have laughed in their face. I don't think it would have been possible.
I think historically also they have experienced this. When the Qualis was stopped and the Innova was brought in, there was a lot of backlash from customers who wanted the Qualis. They still wanted to buy it. They wanted Toyota to continue it. And for all the reasons that they had, they knew that the Qualis was still a little too old school for the new generation that will come on. And the Innova was probably in the right direction. But, they sort of carried on with it. And after an initial slow start to the Innova, they were able to really catch the imagination of Indian customers who wanted a car like that. It also helped that the commercial side of the business also liked the car a lot. So it sort of worked there. Even with the current range, I'm sure when people saw the Hycross, like I said, the overall positioning and package and the premise of the model is very similar to that of the Crysta, so that the acceptance was much more easier. If you see, there was a tremendous shift from a Qualis to a Innova.
Absolutely.
But between an Innova and a Hycross, it's not that.
It's a small, but I think it's also very experience driven, because I think it's different to be in a Crysta and it's very different to be in a Hycross. The experience for someone traveling maybe in the rear seat, it's significantly different at least in my observation. The Hycross feels a notch higher, it's got more of a luxury vibe to it than the Crysta ever did.
More finesse.
And the Crysta was premium for what it was back in the day. But now that we've experienced the Hycross, we know what the difference between the two is.
Correct.
And a similar sort of pull exists for the Fortuner as well. I mean, it's still got a waiting period. It's crazy to think about it. The SUV, which costs on average 40-45 lakh rupees on road, depending on what you buy. It can go to beyond 50 lakh rupees if you pick some of the higher variants. But it's still got that pull, and it's basically the same model that we saw in 2016. 2016 was when the latest gen came out.
Right.
It's nuts if you think about it, how they managed to do this.
Yes, I think here again the whole brand ethos also comes into play. Fortuner again is a very in-your-face SUV. It's not trying to hide anything. It's not trying to say it's a crossover or an MPV. It's just like a downright, conventional old school SUV. And I think that goes very well with the audience that it caters to in that price segment. For good or bad, a Toyota is seen as a premium car maker, maybe not a luxury car maker. And sometimes it's a question of image also. And a lot of times people don't want to show that, they have a lot of money. And being seen in a Toyota is somehow, they are more comfortable being seen in a Toyota rather than a German car or a British car or a Swedish car. So I think that also helps it. The overall positioning of the brand and the model.
I think in outright street cred, the Fortuner probably outweighs quite a lot of the entry level luxury cars. Like it's a bigger flex to be seen
Absolutely.
in a Fortuner than in any other SUV.
Yeah, I think it's a good size, and it can be intimidating, and people like to carry that sort of image. Not all Indians are very aggressive. They like to be little detached, and this sort of gives you that impression that don't mess with.
Yeah, it's an image thing.
Yes,
it's an
it's an
image thing
image
with the Fortuner. So note that down. It's an image thing. But while they've had their successes, they've also had their lows. We talked about the Etios range. There was the Yaris a few years ago, which was at best quite average.
Yeah, with the Yaris, I think they didn't get enough time to build it because they had to stop it for operational reasons. It wasn't probably the benchmark model, but it would have still, again, being a Toyota, I think it could have had a good run. Unfortunately, for operational reasons, they decided it was not feasible for them. They would rather invest their time and effort in other models.
And that segment also was, it has withered away. Right?
It has withered away.
It doesn't exist today.
I think the sedan segment now caters more to enthusiasts. And the Yaris is not exactly an enthusiast.
It's quite far from that, to be fair.
Yeah.
But let's come to the big one, the big question sitting right here in the middle of the room, the Toyota Suzuki Global Alliance. There are lots of people who probably think it's a step in the wrong direction. Some believe that it may end up diluting the value of the Toyota brand itself. We've seen some badge engineering, which admittedly we're not big fans of, when you just simply swap out badges and say, hey, look, new model. So it's probably not the most impressive for us enthusiasts. But do you really think that's true, that it takes a little bit away from Toyota for them to be doing this with Suzuki?
I think we have to understand where they're coming from on this. On paper, it does look like, it doesn't make sense to have just a badge re-engineered car in your stable. But Toyota has its limitations as a manufacturer in India as well. We have seen this with a lot of car makers, that they struggle when it comes to competing with the likes of a Hyundai or a Maruti in the small car space. And that is something that Toyota was probably clear, especially after their exercise with the Etios and the Etios Liva, that it is going to be difficult to make a really value for money, small car that will also be as tough and as reliable as Toyota wants it to be, or even big.
Right.
So I think they did the right thing. It seems to be the most sensible one, that they had to have these cars in their stable because you need to have footfalls. And it came to them at a right time when they didn't really have much of volume models. And while the SUVs and the MPVs were doing well, but they wouldn't give them that much volume. So the Suzukis, which came in rebadged as Toyotas, really helped them with that. They really pushed their numbers up. And as they themselves claim, that it's these badge engineered cars are just part of the business. The bigger alliance with Suzuki is much more vast, and this is just one part of it. So in the whole scheme of things, this is not very important for them. While we may say that it doesn't make sense to have a Ertiga badged as a Rumion or a Baleno badged as a Glanza, but all said and done, if you look at the numbers that Toyota has clocked, it has only been good news for them, and they've not lost any credibility because of that. So it seems to have been a win-win situation for them. I'm also surprised, because usually badge engineered cars, we've seen that between Renault and Nissan, how it's not really worked. But for Toyota and Suzuki, it has worked. I think it's again the investment in the brand that customers are okay with.
Right. So it's more to do with the brand, is what you're saying, is why it has worked for Toyota and Suzuki when it hasn't exactly worked for a Renault and Nissan.
Right. I think that sort of explains it. I mean, that is the answer in black and white. That is the reason people would invest in the brand, even if the model is good. Like if you go to an Ertiga or Baleno, they're fantastic models. We've seen them; they're fairly successful. So it doesn't really matter.
I still remember a few years ago, a high-ranking senior Toyota official had told Girish and I, we were having that discussion together, and They basically told us that for Toyota to preserve its ethos, to build a car the way it wants to build it, and still be able to meet the requirements and needs of the Indian customer at the price the Indian customer wants, was almost impossible. In which context the tie-up with Suzuki makes a lot of sense. Because if you think about it, any affordable Toyota today is actually a result of the alliance with Suzuki. All the pure Toyotas, let's call them, those are all above the 20-25 lakh rupee mark, right? So even the high rider, for that matter, while there is some co-development that has happened there, we know that that project was being spearheaded by Suzuki. So that is so important for them to build that business out. If they want to be present in the volume segment, they needed this alliance. Without this, I'm not sure where they would have been, because practically for the last 8 to 10 years they were being carried by the Innova and the Fortuner.
Right. So just to give that comment in context, the discussion with the executive happened much before the alliance.
That's true. Yeah.
Was announced.
Yeah.
So it wasn't during the same time. The alliance with Suzuki really helped them keep the momentum going. They were going through a rough patch where the Etios was on its way out, and COVID had struck in, and then people were not buying as many cars as they should have for whatever reasons. And this really kept them going. And Toyota being so strong, the foundation being so strong, I think that sort of kept them afloat, and they were able to come out of it so quickly and so easily. I think it's full marks to that company for having done that.
Do you think going forward there needs to be a more concerted effort, a greater effort to actually bring some differentiation within some of the affordable cars as well? Because while that exists with the Grand Vitara and the Hyryder, it doesn't exist with the Glanza and the Baleno. I mean, yes, some small differences, but it's pretty much the same product.
Right.
I mean, now we're going to see the Fronx, right? The Fronx is supposed to go to Toyota in the coming months. So do you think there needs to be that, or is it okay for them to just be continuing the way they are, because those cars are still selling despite there being not too many differences?
So I think they would ideally like to have different models, but in some sense these things work. They cannot get away with it for a long time. As they go on and build new and new vehicles, I think they will be able to create more and more differentiation. I think that goes with any brand for that matter. Right. Slowly and steadily they will be able to do that. But initially, with minimum investment, with time constraint, badge engineering seems to be the quicker way out. And so far it's done okay for them. I also think that it will work for some models. It may not work for some models as well. It's not necessary that every alliance car will do well. Okay. So it will have its natural life or natural death or whatever. But we will find more and more, as time goes by, we will find models which are more and more differentiated.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of memes online with Fortuners wearing Maruti badges.
Yeah.
So it's probably not a good idea to have every model shared across the range, right? Because it might not work out the same way.
Right. I think those, of course, that's just for humor that people have done that. Yeah. It may not go to a level where you have maybe a Land Cruiser as a Suzuki, but certain models can get away with it, I feel. As we are also heading towards, say, electric mobility, where a lot of cars actually drive very similar, again, that's a challenge. So it becomes very difficult to have that differentiation anyway.
I think the bit that you mentioned earlier about them collaborating on a much deeper level than just simply working on the products that they have today is all going to be crucial going forward, because as we transition towards electrified mobility, we will see a lot more R&D happening between Suzuki and Toyota, because Suzuki globally has had very little in the way of electrified models, while Toyota has always had the tech but has been a little hesitant to press forward with it. For the longest time, Toyota said hydrogen would be the future and not EV, and then they suddenly made a U-turn and said, hey, you know what, we're going to do EVs, we're going to do a whole bunch of them, but we will also continue with hydrogen and all other alternative fuel forms. So do you think that is going to be a big deal going forward, considering how strong these two companies are individually? And just their understanding of the Indian market and how that's going to influence them in the future?
So I think both brands have their strengths, both Suzuki and Toyota. I mean, having spoken to Toyota guys a lot, what you understand is that they believe in not a single kind of power source. They believe in multiple power sources. I think the whole point of a hybrid car is that you have multiple power source for your car. And if you go to see their immediate plans as well, it's a lot to do with hybrids, it's a lot to do with BEVs, it's with plug-in hybrids, they've got hydrogen. With Maruti, they also have CNG. So they want to explore all options. And I think, to me, that sounds very sensible. And I think that is how it should be. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket, right? They say that. And if we have done that mistake with, say, petrol or diesel, where we have only petrol or diesel cars running, I think we have an opportunity now where we can have multiple power sources for our cars. So that is something that they also strongly believe in, and they are trying to promote for a long time. But it's, of course, we have to understand that it can't be just one manufacturer doing it. If it can't be a collaborative effort, more people joining in, then it would be a futile task.
I mean, that is what it looks like right now, because if you look at the entire industry, most car makers seem to be moving entirely towards BEVs. They do not want a bridge. They don't want a gap as such. And it's only really Toyota and Maruti that are insisting on hybrids being a real solution. And there's also some talk of them hoping for hybrids to be eligible for subsidies from the government. So, what do you think of that? Do you think that should be that should be the case, that hybrids are also included as BEVs are incentivized, pushed to the people as such?
See, it's very clear. I mean, these are businesses being run. These are corporates. They have to make money. They have to make business sense. If Toyota is promoting hybrids a lot, is because they have been promoting it. They have done a lot of R&D. They've spent a lot of money. Obviously, they will promote it a lot. The same goes with companies which are now trying to push the cause of BEVs, battery-powered vehicles. I think, from my understanding, is we now have the technology where BEVs can be easily made, and we're seeing it. Right? Everyone is getting into the BEV manufacturing process because I think it is easier than putting up a ICE engine vehicle manufacturing,
and also doing a hybrid system with it. It's
correct. It's a more complex process.
Yeah.
So it just makes life easier and quicker. They don't have to wait for a long time to get there. So it works. I think every manufacturer should probably take their own course. What works for them, what doesn't work for them. When it starts making business sense for them. Toyota has been doing it because they've been working with hybrids for a long time. They have honed their skill on it. They have improved it so much. So obviously they are good at it now, and they want the world to experience it. So nothing wrong in them trying to plug that. And I think Suzuki, by virtue of being a partner and having access to this technology, and the fact that they don't have any EV of their own, and it will take some time for them to get there, when there are already brands which are so far ahead, it makes sense to go along with Toyota on that. So both these companies are not wrong. If someone does not have a hybrid tech, and which is why they are promoting BEVs, that's fine. If someone has a hybrid tech and promoting it, that is also fine. But I think hybrids are a solution. I'm also of the belief that we should have multiple power sources. We should not be relying on just battery. Or I'm saying don't rely on just petrol or diesel as well. You should have the whole plethora of fuel that you can get to power a car. It could be solar energy or wind energy or whatever. I think it will only help the cause.
It's also down to what I believe is both companies' understanding of the Indian customer as such. Because hybrids, I mean, aside from making the vehicles less polluting than they would be without an electric power source, they're also incredibly fuel efficient, which I think is a huge calling card for both these companies, and they know how much it means to the Indian customer, which is why they're also quite gung-ho about saying, hey, look, it's not just a hybrid, it's also going to save you money.
Right. I think no two ways about it. If you look at hybrids, they're very fuel efficient, especially in a city environment where you can run them. Performance-wise, of course, they cannot match, say, a purebred petrol or a nice diesel as well. But they're not too bad. And but in the city, they just make a lot of sense when it comes to city usage. it makes a lot of sense to be used because they can be very efficient. I think that may not have been the only driving factor for them, but as a technology showcase, when they must have started working on hybrid, the intent would have been to consume, of course, less petrol or less diesel and reduce the emissions that will be emitted from the tailpipe. So that must have been the intent. But yeah, I mean, it's working in our case.
Yeah, and it's also easier to convince people to buy a hybrid than convincing them to buy an EV right now, given the state of charging infrastructure across the country, because the hybrids don't need external charging. So it becomes an easier sell for both these car makers. It makes more sense to the customers.
If you go to any manufacturer and ask them, they will tell you that EV is always a hard sell. I mean, it's difficult to and takes more time to convince a customer to buy an EV than it is to sell them a petrol or a diesel car. Mainly because there is no precedent. A lot of customers, yes, who experience electric vehicle and it sort of fits their usage, they are ready to accept it more easily. But generally, I'm talking about generally, it takes more time, and this is what a lot of manufacturers will tell you. With hybrids, that's not really a case. I think a lot of customers also confuse hybrids the way CNG works. You know, they feel that you can just flick a switch and between electric and petrol it will work, but it doesn't work like that.
Doesn't work. Yeah.
I think it's very different. Now coming back to Toyota on the hybrid thing, and one of the reasons, you know, when we ask them why they're trying to promote it, they feel that if hybrids are promoted, EVs will also become cheaper. It's a very interesting case because they say it's all about volumes. If you look at the basic powertrain of all the different cars, plug-in hybrids, mild hybrids,
strong hybrids,
BEVs, and ICE engines, there is a common element in all of them. You need a generator, you need a PCU, and you need a small battery.
Yeah.
So that is common to all of them,
and
including EVs.
Yeah.
So they feel that if everything is promoted, the cost of making these will be reduced substantially, having an impact on EVs directly. So because only then will it become cheaper, and EVs can become more affordable, and we can have EVs in the lower range. Till that time, it will always be a challenge. The most cheapest of electric cars in India right now is at least touching 9 to 10 lakhs. Okay, it's nothing cheaper than that.
Right.
And that is also to do with the fact that a lot of equipment has to be sourced from abroad. For example, if you look at a motor generator, the kind of steel that is used, it has to be imported. It's not made in India. The copper wiring that is used, while we have copper in India, but the wiring that is used for an electric motor that is used in a car is something that is not made in India. Yeah. So all those things are there. And but Indians have the potential to manufacture it, but there has to be volume for someone to invest in it. And the volume will come if you promote all sorts of powertrain.
But they've already laid the groundwork. If you think about it, the alliance, Suzuki has already committed a huge investment to Gujarat, and we know that they're going to be ready to roll out their EV, their first EV, the Maruti EVX in 2025, and I believe that will also extend to include Toyota. There will be a Toyota EV as well that will spawn from that collaboration. So going forward, how much of an impact is that going to have with Suzuki making all of these preparations right now, knowing that the market is going to explode in a few years' time, and Toyota will be in that position right there, right next to Suzuki.
I think having a partner like Toyota would only be good. It's good news for Suzuki. It will give them the sort of platform for them to jump onto from there. Good mix. It's both Japanese companies, similar ethos, similar sort of working style. So I think that kind of works for them.
And earlier you were telling me, since you mentioned the ethos of Toyota, you were talking about something you noticed at the factory, the eco zone. I believe you've mentioned the story of the eco zone. Girish has something very interesting to share, which he told me about a little bit before we started recording this. So Girish, I think the viewers would like to know that story. If you could condense it for us then.
Toyota does a lot of CSR activities and even activities generally for upskilling students who can work in this industry, not just for them but for others as well. On a recent visit, I found there's a huge bio park that they've built inside the plant. It's a lot of space that has been utilized for it, and you really wonder why are they doing these sort of things. And it's a very interesting story actually. The biopark, apart from housing a lot of different fauna and flora and all those things, it also has interesting displays for students, and they regularly have students coming to the plant, and you really wonder why they are doing this. And apparently the story all starts from a toilet. So when the government of India started the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, I think Toyota was one of the first ones that started building toilets at houses around, people around in the area. And they did it for a year. And after a year, they wanted to see what sort of impact it had in the area. And they found out that no one was using those toilets. People were using it for storage, as granary and things like that. And they were very surprised. And the simple reason was that people were not used to having a toilet inside their house. We are talking about villages here. They are used to having the toilet outside the house. So it was a little sort of wasted effort, what is happening here. But what they'd also done was they'd also built toilets in schools, in such institutions. And interestingly, what happened locally there was there is a story of that there is this one girl from one of the villages close by, 10-year-old. She went and asked her parents, if my school has a toilet and my teacher has said that that's hygienic, that's what is right, why don't we have one in the house? And parents sort of dismissed the 10-year-old girl. You don't know anything. And incredibly, she collected around 10-15 more children from her village, and they went on a hunger strike in the village, asking for a toilet in their house. And after a day or so, the parents sort of gave in and they built a toilet in the house. And seeing that, the other children who were there with her also started demanding the same thing from their parents. So the toilets started getting used. Now, this case study was also brought to Toyota's knowledge, and they realized how important it is and how important children are in the whole system of decision making and getting things done. And which is why they're working a lot with children, and they get children into their plant. And this idea sort of came from that we have to engage children into the whole Toyota scheme of things, and the ecozone was created.
And I think that's a great example of how you become a household name, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Beyond just a car maker, just a brand, just another label that you see when you go out shopping, car shopping. I would believe that those children would start associating Toyota with positive things in life.
Yes.
And that is how they would eventually end up saying, hey, you know what? I've been so close to this brand in so many different ways. Why don't I buy one of their cars when I grow up? So I think that is a great investment in the future if you think about more than any investment into electric mobility or hydrogen or anything of that sort.
Right.
But that was a fantastic example, I think. Great.
So shared by their one of their senior management.
Appreciate. But that was it. Pretty enlightening chat. I think we covered quite a bit of ground on this one.
I think there is a lot to speak, but it's the brand has had its ups and downs, but there is a lot of learning from the brand. I don't think it has been a perfect story for them, but I think there is a lot of learning for all of us from it.
Yeah, I mean, if we really wanted to get into detail, I think you would have to stay with us for another half an hour or so. But right. I think we'll have to end it here. I hope you enjoyed watching this podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. If you have any quotes, any memories to share of your experiences with Toyota, what you'd like to see the brand do in the future, what you would expect to see from its alliance with Suzuki going forward. If you enjoyed watching this video, found it informative and engaging, make sure to like it and share it with your friends and family.
Thank you.